Oh, Q&A.
Joining us now is Johnny van Woolstrom, the director of the Pearl of Africa.
Been working on a pitch, and I just got back from having a baby on Sunday. So that's why there wasn't a Q&A last week, because I was in the hospital with a baby. So let me just get these questions up. How are you guys doing? I'm also here with Andre, my brother who does the producing. So if you have any questions for him, post it in the chat, and I might be able to bring him in if he, dares to go in front of the camera. But otherwise, I'm here. So first question I got. What's the best way to branch out as an individual? Oh, let me just get, there's so many content creators nowadays. I'm losing faith in myself to compete and stand out from others. Should I worry about other people's work or just concentrate on my own? I think it's a bit of a mix, this thing of trying to find your own thing and your own voice, because that will always trump like long term. But at the same time, you know that the YouTube algorithm or any social media algorithm is driven by what's popular. So if you do a film now about the Mavic Air, for instance, there's a big chance that you're going to get a lot of traffic. The issue that I have, at least personally, with doing that type of content is that you're building an audience that might not be the one that you want. You're building one off of what's popular instead of building it around something that's a core audience that's interested in what you're interested in doing. This is the same thing as making ads for advertising companies that isn't what you want to do. You do stuff just because you get asked and have to pay your bills. But then if you had the choice, you would probably do stuff that you believe in. And it's pretty similar online. There's one aspect of it, like being your big visionary, doing stuff that you believe in and building your channel that way. That will, long term, you will win off of doing that, being your own type of aesthetics and all that. But short term, it's hard to grow a channel off of a philosophy like that. It's really, really difficult. I mean, for us, we have to mix it up. Doing the Confused African is, on the surface of it, it might look like, okay, so this is like a big investment, and is it all worth it doing a series like that? But for us, we might sell it to Netflix, we might sell it to TV here, we will probably get like distribution funding for it, we will hopefully like sell courses to you guys about stuff that is built on the Confused African, but more about that later on. But like doing that stuff around a film or a series or whatever it is much more worthwhile to me. And I think if you can create something that's consistent, it's just going to take a lot of time for you to kind of establish it with a core audience. And to me, that's much more sensible in terms of like building your fan base that's going to stick from project to project. I can just like look at it from like a famous type of creator standpoint. So take Peter McKinnon, for instance, as an example. Like he has he has a really valuable brand that's built on his personality. And his personality is amazing, and it goes through in like every image he does. But doing it around only tutorials, it's gonna blow up and it's gonna grow really quickly. But I'm really sensitive in just like building it around that one thing. I want to branch out and build it broader than that. Because I think if you look at him and compare him to Casey can do whatever he wants. And I think that Peter is getting there, but he wasn't like 6 months ago. He's started to do stuff that is like branching out of what he used to do. And sometimes that fails. Sometimes you can't bring your audience to that. He's managing that, I think. But not everybody will. Because if you start doing something else that isn't what people came for and subscribed for, you're going to push them away. So that's what I would be like sensitive towards. Like try to be consistent, because then you're going to keep people in your ecosystem or whatever it is. Yeah, but anyway, my take on it. And to summarize that, choose. What do you want? Growth or like personal long-term thing? I would focus on the long-term always. I booked my own holiday, or I booked my holiday to Uganda. Do you have any travel tips for the country? I'm doing a tour to see wildlife. I guess you should go see the gorillas. You should, what should you do? You should go to Jinja. I always wanted to go kayaking in Jinja. They have this flood that goes, you know, go see the source maybe. Like the source of the Nile comes up there. It's bubbling up through the lake or the flood, or I don't know what you call it. I guess it's Lake Victoria, maybe. Otherwise, go out of the city, like go out of Kampala, get to somewhere else. I went to the border, what is it, like Tororo? Yeah, Tororo Rocks, and hiked a mountain over there just because I was at a wedding. A friend was, like his dad was having a wedding, and I went there with him and do stuff like that. Don't do like the touristy stuff only. That's really boring in the end. And go to clubs because they are amazing. Okay. Bro, any tips on how to stay doing what you love? Keep doing it and don't quit is the best advice you can get. I think that's probably the biggest thing. It's just like keep doing it, start doing it if you haven't already done it, and just like ignore failures because they will come all the time. That's the only thing that's consistent is the failures. The rest can be, you know, however. And I think that you probably, to be more like philosophical about it, you really need to build a platform around your what you want to create. So let's say you want to create documentaries, like I want to create documentaries. You need to figure out like where's your path that can take you to make another documentary and another and another. And probably that's not the traditional way. And it's probably not applying for grants type of way that everybody else does. I mean, there's a small percentage that's going to get into like a Sundance or stuff like that, but don't count on it. I would invest much more in like building a whole concept around your stuff, like whatever you do, your artistry basically. Create something that's consistent and that you can kind of develop into something. And then build stuff that you can sell or that you can get paid to do around that. That could be courses, it could be advertising, like directing commercials like I do. It could be just you working as a DOP and then doing docs on the side. It could be you working for a travel company and then on the side while you get to places you make films. It could be anything, but you have to find a way to sustain whatever you're trying to do and make and build a platform around that. And maybe you have to collaborate with other people to do that. For me it's worked out because I've had this like DOP background that I could always go and shoot stuff on my own, so I didn't have to have like a crew all the time, and I just needed to own a camera and then that was it. Camera and a lav, and then I made my first doc. So that's basically what you should like aim for, to kind of build a platform that can sustain whatever you want to make, and then make sure to pay your bills. Otherwise you just get depressed. Congrats on the baby, thank you. Second baby, love your hair. Thank you. It's not so much hair. Oh, it is, but actually I was losing it for a while because we moved out here and it had too much like minerals or too little minerals in the water, and then, you know, it gets shorter and shorter, so I never have to cut my hair. Just a side note. Anyway. How do you find the theme for a new movie? How do you motivate yourself if you don't have an idea for a movie? I guess I always come back to like doing research. If you're interested in a topic, I think like going and researching that, you will find a path to, for instance, a character or an angle to a story. But in order for you to kind of do something about something, you need to have enough information to kind of form an idea. And for that, you need to do research. So let's say like it could be super self-centric even, but let's say you want to go to Sweden, you want to make a film in Sweden because it's a beautiful, pretty country and all that. So then you kind of start researching Sweden, and you start to look at like what stories is interesting on like a personal perspective, like what's interesting to you, but also like internationally what's gonna work, especially like what will work on the festival circuit, what will work in the media, what angles haven't been done. Like start looking at those things, and then you apply that to Sweden and start to find like a path that you try to kind of travel on. And then I mean, after a while I think you pretty much kind of find a path that's solid, but it takes some time. You need to kind of have a lot of trust in the process, because it takes so much freaking time to kind of understand what you're doing really. Like if you do a doc narrative, I don't know what it is until I'm, you know, in the final stages of editing, but I always have like a vision of what it will be, but it always changes. So you just need to start like going on that path or journey to discover what the story is. And always like reevaluate what it is. If it's, for instance, doing something about a character, then it's much easier that you just, okay, I have this to work with. But if you're starting from scratch, you first need to find the character and then like the story, narrative and all that within all it. Okay, so let's see. Let me just go back to this one. For docs interviews, how do you balance the story you want to tell with the version your character participants want to portray? This is a really like a big thing when you do docs, because there's two aspects of it. Like one is me, for instance, as a white male from Sweden, or European white male coming to Uganda doing a film about a Ugandan trans woman. There's a lot of sensitivity that has to go into a project like that, because you're coming from the outside, you know, from a community, or you're going into a community that you're not part of. So then you need to be respectful of that, I think. And you need to kind of tell the story in an honest way that's portrayed in the way that the community will want it to be portrayed, in a sense that it shouldn't be, you know, making fun of, or it shouldn't be like using them to tell a story. But at the same time, you have to like step aside, and you have to objectively, like from where you're coming from, look at it from your perspective. Because the inside perspective isn't always the only perspective that's going to translate, you know, on a global scale. And I think that's where like the activism aspect of filmmaking, docs especially, it can be really tricky, because there's so many people making films that are preaching to the choir, and they're not making like the whole discussion problematic or nuanced enough so that you get interesting like discussion about something. It's more like preaching to the choir, and the people that will want to watch it will watch it, but the rest that hates it will hate it, and you ignore them. And that division is, you know, it's not gonna bring any progress at all, basically. So what I think is the big dilemma is kind of balancing this respectfulness towards the subject that you're portraying and their story, because it's their story, and then on the other hand trying to communicate it to the other part of it, which is the audience that you're trying to communicate it to. Sometimes, okay, you want to make a social change film, and for that change to happen, you might not want to be the one that is like layering everything sensitive so that everybody feels good in the end. Maybe you want to push it really far to the other side where things start to get uncomfortable. And that's the hard part, like trying to decide those things. And it's a case by case type of situation. You really need to kind of assess like the story, how vulnerable is the person that you're making it about, what situation is it, what type of story are you aiming to tell, because with Pearl of Africa we tried to tell a story that was humanizing of trans people. That was the objective. So we thought about doing that about or through love, and for that to work we had to have Cleo and Nelson on board to make that story, because it was about love, and they were always, you know, part of the story and part of the development of the project, so they had a lot of ownership, and that's one way of doing it. When we did Zero Silence, it wasn't like that. I made that film about my friends, which were basically just regular activists in the Middle East, and then all of a sudden there was a revolution with the Arab Spring, and we followed this from like 3 years before and then through the revolutions in Egypt and Tunisia. And at the time we were talking about Lebanon, and Syria was just starting to happen, and then like Lebanon now, it's logical that we were talking about it, but we got a lot of criticism for including Lebanon in this, and now it's obvious because they're affected, really affected by the Syrian war and like refugees and all that. So I think you need to kind of study the subject so that you know enough to be able to kind of trail in all this. With the Pearl of Africa, we worked with groups that was experts on the topic just to get their feedback on everything. So we tried to shape it in a way that from our perspective was like taking all that feedback in, but then shaping it like we wanted it to be shaped, and like tell the story like you want to tell it. And don't care so much like all the vanity shit that people always bring up. I don't listen to that at all. I got so fed up with that, working with music videos and artists that are so self-centered, that I built this filter of that, not listening to anything of like, oh, but I look weird in that picture or whatever. Those things I don't listen to at all. I just look at the story and then look at like them as humans. Are there in any threat, for instance? Like, will people attack them because you do this film? Then you need to be sensitive about those things. And for a large part, like if you do the whole doc circuit on a higher level, you're expected to have like a emergency fund for the protagonists, because you have to be, you know, it's real lives. You need to kind of have a way of handling, okay, so they get jailed, what do you do? How do you support them through that time? Yeah. Long answer. If I make a cool short documentary, should I bother with film festivals? Maybe. If you had an audience online, you wouldn't have to bother at all. There is a value in it for networking, and there is a value in it if you have a second project that you want to make, to build the networks in order to have that in place for that film. Then it's super valuable to go the whole festival circuit, because you will need those people to make your project happen. But in terms of the rest, like finding an audience, I don't think so. Then it's much better to do it online. Like Vimeo staff pick would have much more impact than all the film festivals you can go to, Sundance and Cannes included. You will never get, you know, the same audience impact from going to a festival. But that might not be what you're after. If you're after selling your ID for a feature film or something like that, then it makes total sense to go to the festivals, because that's where the industry people is. So look at it as like audience and then industry. For industry, festivals definitely do it, and you probably need industry even if you want to go the online route. You can meet with people, like we networked a lot and have like support for our coming film from Kickstarter, for instance. That's stuff that happens at festivals. So you need to go to those places in order to build relationships. And yeah, that type of stuff won't happen online. It's really hard to get as broad of a reach as you get at festivals. Bro, it's kind of stupid how I got to know about you. It was actually a comment on Casey's vlog. Good. We did that for a while, tried to comment on other people, especially Casey's, to get people like you to actually come here. So then that worked. Some people got really pissed about it, but it worked, so we kept doing it. How do you think your living place affects your work? I think living in Sweden, for instance, affects a ton on how I see films. Like you have cultural references from wherever you are. Those are super important as you're shaping your style, or as you kind of become a filmmaker. When you find, or when you try to figure out what your style is, all that inspiration is like super important. It's a huge part of whatever style you find is part of your cultural DNA, basically. So what I'm mostly like grown up on as like when I studied film is pretty much like Roy Andersson, like Bo Widerberg. I don't know if you guys know about these. There's a Swedish directors, but they're like super far from each other. There was pretty much those two were the polar opposites. One is super stylistic type of cinematic filmmaking. The other one is super realistic, but both are fiction. So Bo Widerberg is really like realistic but fiction, but there's a nerve to like every scene and the emotions and how it's shot and all those things, while Roy Andersson is super stylistic, very much of like the faded type of look and all that. And I try to take inspiration from all of those, and you do that while you study or while you learn film. Now that you have, you know, kind of developed your style, you don't look so much for that type of inspiration anymore. But once you start out, that's all you reference stuff on. Like I use references, especially when I pitch for commercial jobs, but that's pretty much the only time that I will use other people's references. When I do my films, I try to go out and shoot and create the type of reference that I want to have. But for commercials, that's just not viable, because you usually don't get paid until you have the job, and you need the reference to get the job. So it's a bit of a backwards type of thinking. But other than that, living in a place also has like a mood, and you have a light. In Sweden you have like this stylistic approach, like a simplistic style that's in the IKEA furniture, and you have it in the clothes and all those things, and it's a very strict type of aesthetics, and I think that kind of comes back to the faded and the cinematic look as well. I'm not a fan of like, I can have like shaky cameras and all that I can buy, but I can't deal with not properly exposed images. That's like not gonna happen. And even like shaky stuff or like a zooming thing within an image, like when I do them as a filmmaker or a DOP, I do them just to get the next shot. Like this transition here, zooming in, that's the last thing that I want to have in my shots, because I want it to be clean and cinematic, but still realistic and have this shaky nerve to it. That's like controlled but very unpredicted. That's the idea anyway. And I think that whole thing, it comes from both like the Scandinavian strictness as well as the realistic stuff that you often see here, because we do a lot of docs, just like Canadians do tons of docs. We're a really doc-centric country, and I think that also has to do with like the technology advances. Everybody here has their equipment and have had it since probably in the 90s. They've been able to make their own docs, like self-funded, so that's kind of created a whole movement around it. Unfortunately, that doesn't translate as much into like YouTube. A lot of them are still stuck making the documentaries for the festival circuit and winning a lot of prizes, so maybe they should, but it's not really a viable way of living. And most of them just go either into like do TV stuff, or they do commercial stuff, or they teach. And yeah, if you want to make a living, that might not be the best way to kind of continue your craft, to have something else fund it. So we're trying to mix that. Side note. Yeah. Let me see. Are you sick of YouTube becoming a travel channel with pointless transitions and pop music? I know I am. I fell asleep with this on my mind and woke up with the best idea on how to do YouTube without becoming the carbon copy of most of these YouTubers who want to do the same thing. Yeah, but that's with all trends, and YouTube is full of them because it's so easy, I guess, to publish and to like get onto a trend. It's really easy to just like do the same thing. When you start out, that's what you do. As you're starting out making films, you always copy somebody. That's how you learn. That's how I did it. That's how anybody has done it. They've always had like references to other people. And once you go beyond that and you start to doing, you know, your own expressions, for instance, then things start to get interesting, I think. But when you're still in that phase of copying, that's when you get all the shit. And that's too much of, because there's so many young people on YouTube, that's where they are level-wise, I think. So you can't really expect a lot of them to like go on this more intellectual level, because they're still developing, and they're developing out in the open and trying to like find their voice out in the open. And I mean, you can judge, but I'd rather not just watch it. I think it's boring with just like pretty shots. It's just like I see music videos as the most boring thing, because it's just shallowness in essence, and that's what the travel videos are as well. And it's just like, oh, really cool music, and I don't buy that as a commercial. So why would I buy it from, you know, somebody random on YouTube doing it? And some people like Colder has that style, and maybe that will evolve into something. But I mean, doing that every video all over again, like that's gotta be tedious to kind of do that all over again. And that's what I was talking about in the beginning of the Q&A, that like you have, if you build an audience around that and they expect that, then you're gonna be stuck in it. And it's hard to branch out and kind of get those to kind of go to the other channel. I know, for instance, Ollie, that has like Mambo Jumbo and Mambo Vlogs, he's got a channel, I don't know if it's like 2 million, and then he's working on his other channel that has like 170 or 80 or 90,000 subscribers, and it's really hard to translate the 2 million over to the other one, because he wants to make both of them, but he knows that maybe the one that is about Minecraft might die. So how do you actually like stay alive, because you need this other channel to be able to do it long term? Or you get lucky and Minecraft still lives forever. But that's the issue you have when you create a channel that's just like focused on one thing, like travel. Then you're going to be stuck in that for a long time, and you will get bored of it. That's why the vloggers stop, because it's, you know, it gets boring and predictable and like tedious at some point. But for me, I just try to mix everything, and I know that for some people that watch this channel, it's going to be off-putting and people will like unsubscribe because of it. But long term, I think that the people that stay will be more interested to be, you know, on this long-term journey, and that's what I focus on. So you have to pick, basically. Either you niche yourself, which is how you become big on YouTube and any, you know, online place. Basically, you have to niche yourself. But if you rather have something that's really like the core of what you do, then maybe that's not the way to go. At least for me, it's not. But for some people, it might be exactly what they want. But I would think that most people, whoever it is, will get bored of it. I mean, Casey even got bored of vlogging and the whole concept of that, and had to like switch it up. And I'm eager to see like what he's thinking of now that he quit Beam, and what's gonna come after, because that's where I think you will see either like a level that is amazing, or I mean, it will just get boring. But it is a 50-50 chance. So we'll see. My take on it, at least. How do I get started with filmmaking as a minor? I think that anybody that like hasn't yet started making films need to start making films and telling stories. And I think I had like a similar question here that was like, where do you start with like a story if you don't have an experience or something like that? And I think the important part is to try to look at it from like a personal perspective, try to make personal films at first, because that's what you know. So if you make, for instance, when I applied for film school, a self-portrait, you're forced to look like at yourself and find tiny nuances and details in your own storytelling and the narrative that you're trying to tell. But you have all the, because it's you have all the like nuances and details that will make the story rich. If you can try doing those things first, trying to do it personal first and then branching out, then you will learn quicker. I think anybody that doesn't do the personal stuff will have a much more like shallow approach to storytelling. There are geniuses, but there are not many. So if you can be one of those, then go ahead, be that. But most people have to kind of practice storytelling. And it's really hard to do that on somebody else. Documentary is the perfect way for me to learn how to tell a story about somebody else, because you can just observe and kind of learn the story as you observe. So you don't have to script the stuff for it to be good. You basically just have to pick up on like small tiny details and select them and put them together and kind of curate that world that you're going for. For me, that's a much more effective way, but I have a lot of like script writing background because I tried fiction first and then I went to docs. But I always found that whole process of like scripting things to be too boring and predictable. So for me, doc was the way to kind of learn. You could go and follow somebody, and then you can, by piecing stuff together in the edit, you learn narrative storytelling. And if you go towards yourself and tell a story about you or your mom or your grandma or whatever it is, you're either forced to kind of confront yourself and realize that I can't tell story for shit, or you realize that I'm a genius and I can see things that other people can't see in these people. But it's like just practicing. You need to practice. Do a lot of films, and I mean, things will be eventually evolving to something that's great. Can you recommend some independent films or directors you like? I'm bad at watching films nowadays, but I was thinking, I got this question a couple of weeks back and I couldn't come up with a film that I could recommend for 2017, but I did afterwards. I realized that there's one film that I actually did like that I watched on Netflix, and that's Given. That was a really good doc. Like, there's very rare that I watch like a film and I get like all excited about it. That one is that. Like The Act of Killing, Joshua Oppenheimer, that series is amazing. What else? I'm trying to think of newer films. That's hard. I mostly watch series, and that's just the regular stuff. I guess at festivals you get recommended by other people. So there's Cartel Land is a good film that I liked. What else? The Island and the Whales is a pretty good film that I like. What else? I guess that's it for now. I suck on films. I should only like bring up the old stuff. I got mostly inspired by, for instance, Jim Jarmusch, Larry Clark, Harmony Korine, Roy Andersson, Bo Widerberg, Stefan Jarl. These directors that came out like long time ago, so they don't make so much stuff anymore, and it's not that exciting anymore. I guess Harmony Korine did like a film pretty recently, like Gus Van Sant, amazing director. Yeah, that's it for now. How many and what are the different types of documentaries? How to know which one to apply? There are so many documentaries, but I guess that's just like with genres, I guess. Like there's tons of different documentaries. That's the thing with docs, there's not one form of it. Everything changes because all the stories are unique. So you will get to like different arcs that are traditional, but that's just like any arc. All of it is like the 3-act structure pretty much, and then from that, because it's dark and you have a lot more material and it's more unpredictable, you will get a different pace and you will get a different type of scene structure, but you still have that same type of arc, and that's just because it works really efficiently. For the Pearl of Africa, we built it around like one journey, so it's like a road movie basically, but the film is like a film about love, and it's a love story, so it will mix, and you will mix genres a lot when you do docs, and I think it's more of like finding a narrative structure that's something that you can build drama around and build like a climax and all those things around, but then also find like the universal story within that. That's what it is to me, at least. How do you do your budget? I use Andre for that. He does budgets. If you do not have a certain gear for your documentary, do you include it in the budget as new or as rented? Andre! Yeah. So I have a question for him. Okay, so now you need to come and sit here.
Where's the camera?
Is it this side? Yeah, it's this side. Okay, so you need to kind of squeeze down, and the focus is like, no, like that.
There?
Okay, so this is Andre, my brother, similar,
nice
but
to see
different. So the question is, how do you do your budget? And I said, you do the budget.
How do you mean, how?
If you do not have a certain gear for your documentary, do you include it in the budget or as new or rented?
Yeah, that's a good thing. We always, since we do a lot of different projects, we always, even though we know we have the gear, but we put everything in the budget. So we put everything as rent, even though we have the gear, we put it like the C300, for instance. If we know that we're gonna use the C300, we put it as rent in the budget and charge for it.
And then when your character speaks a native language, is it better to caption it, dub it, or third person translating? This is also your type.
Once again, when you...
Do you subtitle?
No, we don't. We leave it like we use the...
No, but captions, dubbing, we just subtitle.
Yeah, we've never dubbed.
No. Third person translating. Yeah, usually third person translating.
Yeah, so we hire a firm that translates for us. Sometimes we do it ourselves, but only for our own projects, basically.
Okay, I think that's it.
So how is it going?
It's going good. Let me just see if I have any other question for you.
Is he behaving?
Who knows? What's the most important? No, I don't think there's any more of that. Nope. Okay.
That's good.
So you want to say anything else?
I don't know.
Nope.
What do you think of the Confused African so far? It's been we're releasing the 3rd episode tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Watch it.
3rd episode
YouTube
tomorrow.
screwed us on the last episode.
Yeah, there was something wrong there, just because there was politics or something. Did you get notification that the episode was released?
I don't think a lot of people did. Okay, I'll just continue because we just have like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You will come back in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you make your character feel not intimidated by the camera or gear, by you not being intimidated or feeling that it's intimidating with having a camera there? You just go in and you just, like, it's natural for you, then it's going to be natural for them. Don't pay attention to it, don't care about it, just ignore that you have a camera. That's the best way. Don't make, a thing out of having a camera. That's the biggest thing that I see people do, and the mistake of doing. They go in thinking that it's so sensitive to have a camera. And if people show that they're uncomfortable, then you need to be supportive and you need to kind of make them comfortable. But the biggest thing you can do is just act like it's the most natural thing, and they will stop thinking about the camera. They will just, look them in the eye, talk to them, just be natural and have a conversation, and they will stop to think about the camera. And bring it out as early as you can so they get used to it, and film them all over the place just to get them to be used to having it there, because then they stop to think about it. And that's the key, basically. What would be the most important thing to buy for filmmaking, excluding a camera? Good audio would be the most important thing, because that together with the camera is basically what you need to make a film, and then you maybe need somewhere to cut it, but you can probably borrow a computer, worst case. But that's what I would say. I made my first doc on like 150mm lens, fixed lens, 1.4 Canon, a Canon Mark II, and a Sennheiser G3 system wireless lab. That was it. That's all I needed, and anybody can make that type of setup today. Because the cameras that you can get for like 1K today is better than that 5D, and you can get a kit lens and do fine. But then you need to learn how to expose, and those things you need to invest in, and how to kind of mount a lab that doesn't make noise and isn't as visible as this one. If you don't want that. If you want it to be visible, then make it visible, because that's how you get the best audio. Okay. What are the 3 filmmaking tools besides one camera, one lens, and a cutting unit that you would take on a lonely island? Very similar to the last one, but what would I take? One lens. I'll probably get back to the microphone. I would get a so I'm gonna go with the Electrosonics PDR with the Sanken COS lab. That's all I need. But the thing is, you need batteries for all this. It's gonna be very difficult to be on that island. Maybe I would just like skip the editing station and just get one camera, one lens, Electrosonics, and then like a solar charger system. Because I can edit when I get back, if I get back. Otherwise I don't have any use for it either way. What do you think about the small sensor cameras like the GH5? Love the GH5. I'm actually considering ditching the Canon C300 Mark II just to go on the GH5 and the GH5S, and then have a bigger Ursa Mini 4.6K as like a bigger production cam. And the reason for that is partly because Blackmagic is supporting, and partly because I like the smaller form factors of the Panasonics. So Canon isn't really small, it's too big, too clumsy. Like, this is a great camera, but yeah, it's not worth paying for if you don't have to. How do you manipulate a scene to get more dynamic range for a chance to create a classic cinema look? I guess you're talking about like having a limited dynamic range, and how do you manipulate it? I don't know. Maybe that's what you mean. There are a couple of ways you can do it. You can light to bring like the ambience up, so you bring the shadows up, so you bring them closer to the... So for instance, let's say we have a window like we have there. You would expose according to what the window is, and then you would light the room so you get closer to the window, so you expose the window correctly. So that's the basic concept of it all. And then you would have to bring up the shadows by lighting, not by grading, so that they get closer. And when you have a small amount of latitude like you have in the compressed formats, you need to bring them pretty close to each other. When you shoot on C300 Mark II or like a Ursa, you don't have that problem, because you will get so much more dynamic range that's clean in the shadows. You could pretty much like shoot any situation that isn't lit, and you're still gonna get a nice image. You might have it underexposed, you might not have like faces exposed correctly and all that, but you will get a cinematic look, as long as you also work with the light. So maybe you shoot towards the light, or you don't. Maybe you shoot from the away from the light. It's a little bit about like trying to work with the light and putting people in the right position and the camera in the right position if you can't light. That's the best way of using like the lower latitude type of cameras, and that's the way you have to work with it. If you can light stuff, light stuff. If you can't light stuff, move with the light in order for you to be able to light it by putting the camera in the right position and the people in the right position. Yeah, because you need to bring the highlights down and the shadows up. So you can use filters on windows and that sort of thing as well, like ND type of filters. That's another way to do it. There's tons of ways that you can kind of manipulate it, but in dark situations, it's really hard to do those things. So you usually are like stuck with getting the ambience up in a room, for instance. So maybe you'll just like throw light up into the ceiling just to get the ambience up, and then you use the natural light as it is, but you want to get the shadows up in order for you to expose correctly and be able to not blow out all the windows that you're going to get in a place, or all the nice pretty like flares or window what do you say, like if you have the sun, for instance, coming in through a window, you get that nice shape of that coming in through the window, or coming into the room through the window. Those things you want to have exposed correctly. You don't want to overexpose those, and then you need to bring the shadows up. Yeah. What stories to tell as a beginner? Yeah, I answered that one. How do you correct skin tone exposure for GH5 and Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera? The best way is to use a false color monitor so that you can get them in the right range. Like look into false color. I'm gonna make a video about it later, but false color is basically just like you have the IRE scale, and you can see where, if you just study it, you can see where the skin tones should be depending on like you're Caucasian or you're black or whatever it is. You can know where you should be in terms of having your skin tones. But that's one way of doing it. The other one is like vector scopes, which is not as easy. Another one is a light meter, which isn't all that easy either. And then you have the histograms, which is really hard to see where the person is. On a vector scope, at least you got, like for instance, this is the vector scope. So in the middle you will have, the middle of the image will be in the middle. So you will at least know what is in that part of the image, so you can see on the vector scope, like where is the values. But it's pretty hard, so false color is a professional way of doing it. Sony or Canon? Canon. Yeah. Canon. In the US, there are very few women directors compared to the number of men. Is it the same in Sweden? If so, why do you think that is? Yes, definitely. I guess a lot of it has to do with just like the general world we live in, where most men are in the power positions, and they will just hire their friends that are in the closest community of friends or whatever, and then you know they will get the jobs that are developing them to becoming more skilled and all those things, and they will continue to get new jobs and new levels because they're getting hired within those communities. So it's like, it's a really difficult thing to break, because first of all, like anybody that is an artist is under a stressed situation financially. So you can't really go out and like, oh, I need to hire a woman just because she's a woman, just so I can support women. That's gonna end up, you know, being you losing your house and your family and all those things as a consequence. So then it's really easy to sit on the outside and just like say that everybody should hire a woman. But then it's really hard to do it practically, because there's not a system in place to actually support that, you know, change. And I think like as much as we can, we try to do that as much as we can and have money to do it. We will always choose a woman before a man if we can, always. But most of the time, like you're not in that situation. You're in a really stressed financial situation where you have to kind of use a friend that's lower rate or whatever, or use somebody that could do it tomorrow because you had to have somebody, and there's going to be a friend that can do that. So it's a much more complex thing, I think, than people might think or hope for it to be. But in Sweden, there is also like a demand. If you work and get funding, you have to kind of have a diverse type of crew and all those things. So that helps, because you will get funding if you have a more, or you get more likely to get funding if you have a more diverse crew. Problem with it is that I work with my brother, and it's kind of hard to kind of remove my brother from this equation. So already we're two men, And then we try to work with women, but then you have this conflict of most people on YouTube, for instance, that do film are men. So then you get into this system of it only being men because, I don't know, it's technical, maybe they have more interest for YouTube, or they play more video games, so they got into it because of that. I don't know. There's a separation, at least, between like filmmaking YouTubers are mostly men. Like the people that watch this, I can just check, but it's probably like 80 or 70% men. So then that you get, that it's a certain people that will watch and identify with me as a male, and then that becomes like a problem for women that want to do the same thing because there is a male dominance in that field. But in Sweden in general, there's much more diversity in terms of gender than it is in the US. But we also look at, being a feminist here is something different than it is in the US. And I think it's funny because here everybody that if you don't call yourself a feminist, you're an outcast in Sweden, while in the US it's the opposite. So that's like the big shift, I think. For me, it's obvious that people should have the same opportunities regardless of like gender or wherever they're from, or all that shit. But in practical terms, it's not always that possible to kind of live by, even if you want to. And that's a more of a political thing that you can change by having the right politics. But for now in Sweden, I don't think that it doesn't really support that mentality. I guess there's less men that get supported for doing their films because it's a similar type of film in Sweden. I don't think you have that as much in the US, that like established filmmakers won't get funded because they're making the same film as they've always made. So if you're a male, you need to pretty much invent yourself more, I feel, than if you're a woman. Because just by being a woman, you will be, innovative. So you don't have to do as much to kind of develop the project in a different way than what the males do. So if you make a film, for instance, as a male, you can't make the same thing about the same thing that's always been made, because there's so much that has been made about that already. While if you're a woman, you can actually go in and you can make a story about something that seems ordinary, but just because you have a different perspective, you're gonna have a different film and you're gonna have something that's interesting and new. And that's just because those stories haven't been told as much. And I feel that whole thing is kind of difficult to understand on a whole greater scale. Do you have movies which just say on a hard drive and will never be published? If why? I do have one project that I don't think ever will be published. That was about a year ago. We was gonna do a web series about an artist here in Sweden that's pretty mid-range artist, and it was done. It was like, it's going out on Monday and it's like Friday. And it's like a web series, and it was about to launch and all those things. And then all of a sudden, like the label comes in, there's a lot of bitching about it. We did it for free because we just wanted to build a channel and build something around that whole story. So then I was just, fuck you, and I went and I just told them that, no, I'm not gonna publish this. We're not gonna compromise on this. So yeah, those exist. Stand your ground. Don't let the freaking labels or people shit on you. Who is the best person you have worked with? I haven't worked with him, but I think like the most inspiring person is probably Istvan Borbas, which is like he's DOP of Roy Andersson. I had him as a like workshop teacher and a coach for our like final examination project when I was in film school. He was probably the most, like getting that close to him, and also going to visit Roy Andersson's studio and like walking there and being like, you know, you're hugely inspired by doing that. He was my biggest idol at that point, and you get to go and visit him and talk to him and all that. Like that whole experience is probably one of the biggest impacts in terms of like, okay, so I'm this close to Cannes. That type of stuff is more inspiring, I think, than like people I work with. You take that for granted. A lot of the time I take like people that I work with for granted. I think that I expect everybody to be on a certain level, and like I love the people that I work with, but you always have like people that you stop working with because you kind of are moving on to something else, and then it's kind of hard to see like, oh, is that the best person I work with? Because I don't get inspired by a lot of people. I look up to people, but they're not people that I work with, at least not now. So let me see if I just got any last question. No. So then thank you for watching this week, and I will, yeah, we will see each other again this week or next week. Remember to watch The Confused African. 2 episodes is out. Watch the 3rd one tomorrow, but you can also watch the old ones if you haven't already watched them. And we're doing a whole series breaking down like how we did everything. I think this week is editing, so I'm going to talk about like how I edit and talk to Jonathan, who edited The Confused African, because I didn't edit it. Okay, see you, bye.